Okay. Oh, in progress recording.
Hello, everyone. Beautiful slide that is, if I say so myself.
You certainly may. Let's give everybody a second to roll in here, which I decided to wear a cap. I don't want anyone on this call knowing I'm bald.
Oh no.
Oh no, I have a picture of
Think,
my bald head on the
think
slide.
the secret's out.
Uh-oh. Bad news, guys. Well,
It's just in.
hopefully you're here for this webinar on how to standardize service delivery. I'll stall for, I don't know, 5 more seconds, then we'll get going.
So yeah, everyone, just so you know, you will get a follow-up email with a recording of this webinar. If you were curious, you usually get a couple questions about that. So yes, no worries. You will get that in the next 24 hours.
Sweet. Yeah, and let's get started. Let me introduce the webinar and ourselves. So yes, this is a webinar for how to standardize service delivery with CloudRadial. So specifically, how to leverage the CloudRadial platform to think about, understand, and really even we're going to define what the service delivery layers are and what matters and what we're focusing on soon to come. I'm Ricky Cicchini. I'm the VP of Product here at CloudRadial. With me is Katrina Lee, Marketing Director, Graphic Designer Supreme.
No,
My
director of
goodness.
content and design. But you know what? Director
We'll
of
take it.
marketing is just easier.
We'll take it. And Katrina is here to help me out. So if you guys have any questions, obviously I have kind of an agenda. I'm going to go through and we'll cover it in the slides themselves. But I'm going to go through and kind of answer where this PowerPoint's coming from, why we're talking about this in the first place, how the CloudRadial platform actually looks, and again, whether you want to use CloudRadial or not. My goal in any one of our webinars is to try to give you some information so ultimately it's net useful for you. It's not just some product pitch stuff. If you do any questions, comments, whatever, ideally use the Q&A. I think that Zoom has here because that's easier for us to answer. If you throw in the chat, we'll manage. So either way, but we prefer Q&A if it's all the same to you guys. So with that, let's get started. All right, if you are not super familiar with CloudRadial, again, I'm not here to give you a full demo, full spiel. I want to specifically just cover the gist, and that is that CloudRadial is what we call a CSA platform. Yes, we made CSA up, but because we wanted it to match PSA, right? So where your PSA is your professional service automation, probably where you're living out of for service delivery. CSA is basically the client equivalent to that, right? Client bridging. Well, again, I don't want to spoil my presentation. I have all these slides that I teed up, but the gist is we're bridging the gap between service delivery and client success. So when we talk about CSA, most of the time, if you look at CloudRadial stuff, we're talking about a client portal, which is handy because that actually fits really nicely into what we're talking about. And then all the additional stuff that CloudRadial can do, you can look it up. But specifically for today, I want to focus on what we said, which is the service delivery. So we're talking about the different service delivery layers, right? And how to think about this holistically in a way that is pretty helpful. The SLA impact from standardization of that service delivery. So basically, not just identifying what we're focusing on, but what actually changes if we improve or worsen in different areas of our service delivery. And again, attaining operational flexibility. What does that mean? What does that even look like? And does that have any actual impacts to you and your clients, right? I'm going to be coming at basically every one of these points from a client-facing standpoint because, shocker, CloudRadial is a client-facing tool, really intended for that gap. So we always try to frame it in reference to hopefully your existing stack of tools, regardless of whether they're client-facing or not, and basically how to take those two clients and make them make sense. And then at the end, I'll give a hands-on visual demonstration, not just of CloudRadial. Again, I'm not here to just give a demo of the product and say this is cool, but I want to talk about and showcase the specific things I mentioned in each one of these so everything kind of comes together for you guys. So with that being said, I wanted to start with the MSP service delivery layers, and we're going to go from bottom to top because this is an important thing. I mean, this webinar is specifically on standardizing service delivery. And again, we mean client service delivery, but it starts with the operational layer down here. So I don't really need to explain to you guys because you guys are the masters of this, I think in the entire tech industry, but obviously for our sake, for our MSP buddies out there, you know the tools you use in the stack, right? Most commonly we're dealing with people that even one-man shops all the way to enterprise MSPs that are using some kind of a PSA, some kind of an RMM, and then the different tools on top of that, right? Whether it's backup or security tools, whatever, depends on how you kind of shape your MSP, how you want to deliver your services, right? But the gist is you've got a fair backlog of that stuff. Cool. Then right above that, right? So you've got all these scattered tools. You've got the integration layer. The integration layer of service delivery basically comes down to how are you automating those things? How are you tying those things together? A lot of those tools that we're talking about will natively either integrate because they have an ecosystem with other tools. I'll just start name dropping, like, with like Kaseya and ConnectWise, popular PSA tools, but really even Synchro and Halo, they all have kind of their preferred tool stack stuff. And they try to take care of those integration layers as much as possible, right? They try to make it easy for you to pass data back and forth, build workflows off stuff, automate stuff. So you're having a good uh, information flow so you can deliver your services more effectively, right? There's always that time to, put the services in the hands of your techs, learn it, apply it. Then generally every tool you talk to wants to shorten that. That's why every tool always says, save time, do this. They're really talking about how well they integrate. The problem that we see and that the reason we exist and have not died is because the last layer, the client-facing layer, is the one that is both most neglected and I would argue most important. And not just because I work at a company that pays me to say that, but because the client-facing layer is what funds the rest of them, right? No clients seeing what you deliver means no paying for the integration because client money dries up, there's no room to buy tools, all that stuff. So kind of the issue and where we start with this webinar is identifying these different layers of service delivery and seeing that between the operational layer and integration layer, there's a lot going on. What bubbles up to the client-facing layer of service delivery does not always match everything down there because we know that a lot of stuff is unsexy for clients. A lot of stuff doesn't make sense. A lot of stuff adds more questions and issues than it really is worth. So when we talk about that client-facing layer of service delivery, we're basically just saying, what do they see? How can we standardize and simplify that? And how can we make that something that is tangible? Because if you make that good, again, it funds the rest of the stuff, but it also adds value. So focusing on that service delivery is kind of the key here. And we're talking even more specifically in there, it's what does it look like to access your, operational layer? What's the go-between? So again, selfishly, client portals is a cool way to do that. Really, any client portal can do this, right? Client portals are nothing more than a window into the way you're rendering those services, but it also includes a communication, right? So anything from outage alerts to, I don't know, messages about changes in service to where you submit your tickets, all that stuff is part of it. So basically the interface. With that being said, if we are generally okay with this definition of a service delivery, then basically we get down to what happens when it all kind of falls apart. It's weird because it doesn't always feel like it's falling apart unless you really look at some of the stuff under a microscope. And this time we're going to look at it from the top down. So what we typically see, and this is part of the reason why we thought this would be a cool webinar discussion, is we look at how the service delivery affects individual clients and we work backwards. So let's say you have a portal for client A, doesn't matter if it's CloudRadial or not, but you know that client A is let's say your biggest, most important client, maybe your oldest client. Everything's pretty much custom, meaning that the stuff they use is custom, the tool stack to the processes they have for you on user onboarding or communications with them is very specific. You might work with a point of contact or whatever have you, right? You can imagine plenty of clients. Client B, same level of complexity, different setup, but you use a different tool because maybe they were onboarded with a different tool. So they've literally got a different user experience. That's why it says user inconsistent UX, different tool stack. Client C, again, maybe they can use a lot of the standardized stuff, but they have unique workflows. So what ends up happening is everybody gets custom, and custom is typically attributed to good, right? Custom stuff is awesome because we like to be able to customize things. But what happens is when all this stuff kind of goes sideways and you kind of miss that glue between them all, that lack of standardization ends up being really, really time consuming. So even though the service delivery slide I literally just said means go do client stuff, everybody naturally ends up doing it because, again, you end up talking to the clients and they're paying the bill. But missing the integration layer means that you don't really gel well with your operational layer. So documentation becomes an issue to bubble that up. Training becomes a problem because you have to both train your internal staff on how to manage each client differently because the service delivery is literally different between each one. And then the quality dips between each one because some of them could have really, really great ones that processes are documented, or you have some superstars that know client A's stuff really well. Again, I could go over this, but you get the idea. Basically, if you have disconnected clients, you can kind of find the path of why they're disconnected, and it typically comes down to these layers not gelling properly, right? So again, this is a AI generated thing, which is why my squiggly line goes all over the place, but I did put in the prompt. And the gist is that, again, every single client becomes arduous to onboard and kind of manage overall. So in general, how do you balance that? And this is one of the questions that we get a lot, right? Do you want standardization? Do you want customization? Do you want both? Where's the level? So at the end of the day, what we're really going for client experience is we basically high level want clients to be able to see what they're paying for, right? That really kind of helps them understand everything down to that operational level of service delivery. You want to be able to say consistent onboarding, meaning that you guys don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel or really, really have a painful process for every new client. And that goes for the client themselves, meaning, the company and all their users, or even individual users. So we want to try to standardize that as much as possible because that sets up a consistent service delivery framework. And then also even that communication is really big. So again, where do people go get updates? Where do they understand when framework changes happen? How tough is it to let people know, right? To help people understand that like, hey, we no longer do things via email, we're doing things via this form or whatever have you, right? So the important thing is we're not out here to make everything identical, which is, I think, one of the pitfalls when people try to approach this, because obviously that doesn't work. We are just trying to standardize the processes, again, and leaving enough leeway and variance to offer customization. We work with, I can't remember the exact number, but I think it's over 1,100 MSPs now, and 1,100 MSPs you I see like their clients and there's customizations all over the place. There's no universe where clients are okay with standard stuff, especially the really picky ones. Some of them we might get away with boilerplate deployments. We'll talk about that as well. A lot of them do not. So again, we're after process standardization specifically for service delivery at the client level. So we have a very, very specific sliver that we're working in here in this area. But again, this does have ramifications all the way down to the operational layer, which again, MSPs are strong at picking in the first place. So one of the things we talk about, and I'll cover this very briefly, is like SLAs. And it was worth a mention because every now and then this pops up from our own customers, right? The SLA challenges in general, not related to how you present them, because I'll start off even before we look at all these bullet points at the bottom. If your clients are asking about SLAs, you're probably in trouble. Let me be clear. This is not something that we come up with all the time, and clients want to see SLA contracts, whatever. The same way you typically don't want to see contracts for your phone bill all the time or your bank. If you're having to peruse the fine print, something's wrong. So when we're talking about SLA challenges, we're basically just saying the way you can render and stick to what you think the framework is for client-facing things can vary a lot, right? Especially when we're talking about email, phone calls, access issues, point of contacts leaving, kind of chaos in the client area. So those things can kind of be listed down to their ticket submission process. Again, the communication channels, the progress that they track for communication. So again, shifting contacts is one of the biggest pain points in the MSP industry, whether the clients are talking to a different technician every time they try to talk about their issues with their experience or their technology in general, or whether it's on your side, you're talking to clients and they're the ones constantly shifting. Client A, you have a point of contact that agrees to stuff and they're your one person. Client B, it's almost like you're talking to a new person every time that has to get context or whatever. As it relates to SLAs, this kind of stuff just throws a wrench in things. It slows communication down. It makes things kind of tricky to keep track of, to follow up with. So when I use SLAs, I'm using the general term of like what you're agreeing to render for them. And again, what is the actual thing that they've agreed to get from you, right? So that visibility is super hard, and these changing contacts add further complexity. So specifically, we answer that question by just focusing on the standardization of how they do stuff. And again, we'll look at tangible examples, but intake process, meaning like ticket intake, right? We know this typically the MSPs, you guys don't have an issue understanding or agreeing with. It would be more ideal for someone to submit an onboarding or an offboarding form through a standardized checklist of stuff that we know we need, right? Name, emails, forwarding lists, whatever, versus just emailing and calling. But the second point is even more important because aside from those day-to-day things, when you start getting into strategic discussions with clients and we're talking about what the client really wanted out of the relationship with you, which is technology management, strategic vision, you want to also be able to set that clear expectations and transparency in a way that they can access it, right? Make it evergreen, make it standard. So you're not having to babysit every client, double check, keep a huge list of notes, and rely on individuals to know clients to deliver that service. And ideally, if you kind of hit that ballpark, you're not really talking about SLAs altogether, right? Because SLAs is kind of the fallacy. They signed up to get services. Those are the terms that kind of muddle things. So if you can get that experience consistent, those kind of fix themselves naturally. And again, we're going to go through an example of what that looks like to give you an idea of where you can start yourself to fix any SLA issues. And lastly, we're talking about that client experience constant. So basically, one of the issues that we see a lot is how does a constant even happen? So when you talk about client delivery constants, we're saying like, especially with ticketing, which is traditionally something we talk about all the time, one of the first things that people associate with MSPs. Now, if you have everything in one system, say commonly like a PSA, let's say you're using any one of these PSAs has a built-in portal and they're using the system and fine, right? A couple people can log into that portal, see their open tickets, submit some stuff, and that's all well and good. You decide on your end that you think another PSA would be better for cost reasons, for efficiency reasons, it matches your expansion plans, whatever, right? That's your thing. Now what's happened is you haven't created that constant because when you start pulling the blocks out of your own services, right, your operational layer, you've now affected the client layer. So by changing that up, you now have to retrain, re-explain, restart that client experience, and doesn't always go great, right? It takes a lot of effort and time to train people how to do things one way. So pulling the rug from underneath them, even if it's gentle, still causes disruption. So when I say the first line here, why do you want to bother creating these constants is because if you can theorize a world where constants exist, right, and you can have a ticketing portal that doesn't matter what ticketing system you use, the experience is consistent, then you can worry about what's best for your ops and not the client, which ironically, I'm here talking about client stuff, but I'm really talking about how do I free both of you guys to do your own thing, right? Everyone's after what they want. So if you can do that, and I'll show you exactly how, you can obviously get better vendor negotiations because you're not screwed. You're not stuck with a vendor that works with another vendor that works with another vendor. And then again, the whole tower falls apart if you pull one. Again, faster adoption means that you're not having to retrain. So you can build more evergreen documentation saying this is how to submit a ticket or view a QBR or whatever. You're picking and matching and pulling whatever tools you want to best fit your service delivery. Again, no disruptions to client facing as you switch out your tools, and you're future proofing because chances are these tools can keep up with you. Now, obviously, I'm talking about CloudRadial, but really, you could probably even do this yourself. This is just considerations as you think about how to standardize that service delivery. So it's not just throw something in front of the client and say, this is our process. It's about thinking what happens when you change that process? How flexible is it? So ideally, service delivery looks something like this, right? Again, I put CloudRadial in here because this is what it does, but if you have system A and RMM tool one and backup tool, whatever, I would like to be able to switch you over here without having to ruin everything. So really now when we talk about service delivery, we're talking about that client one, right? That should be the same portal, same experience, same access, whatever. The integrations between those, you obviously can let us handle some of that thing, right? How do we logistically take an API set from whatever, all the technicalities from one to the other and keep it consistent? So be thinking about that in the middle, but again, free yourself up from here. This is ideally what we're talking about when we say standardizing the service delivery of the client. It should be that you can swap things out without causing a huge mess. To be able to get to this level, you need to more or less know the things that will vary between, today and tomorrow. What are the things that you guys are interested as businesses, right? MSPs or any IT service provider. What are you interested in expanding and changing and growing and then looking ahead? This is the same exercise that we use for everything from feature delivery to just talking to our clients, right? If somebody says, I'm thinking about swapping to a different documentation system, then the question should always be, how will that impact our clients, right? Obviously, if it's you guys and you're working on your own systems, there's leeway, there's patience, whatever. But clients have the least patience and the least understanding, and they're kind of out of our way because even though I do this for our clients, which are you guys, and you do this for your clients, which are other businesses and stuff, how do we ensure that you're not kind of ruining everything? So again, building that layer of consistency is possible with something like CloudRadial. So if you put it all together, then the idea is that you've got the three different kind of touch points that we talked about. So the touch point of having that top level layer identified, right? Onboarding portals, whatever have you. You can do this with pretty much any tool. You just want to have a consistent process that you can customize. That's one. You also need it to have that serving your SLA game. A lot of times when I talk to partners, prospects, anybody, and they talk about the idea of like, we have a portal, we have something, we have a form, usually it fails to get adoption. And when I really get into my psychologist mode and I break that down, I go, why did it fail to get adoption? It's because it didn't benefit you guys enough to push it, and it didn't benefit the client enough to want to use it. And that's a failure in the SLA, again, SLA in air quotes, in the delivery, right? It wasn't valuable enough in either way to make an effort to do it. So if you have the consistency and the value, then the third one is flexibility. Consistency, value, flexibility means that, again, even if both of those things don't offer enough value, the concept of being able to swap out and be agile in a world where, we see new tech tools come out all the time. There's smarter stuff, better stuff, more competitively priced stuff. Locking yourself into contracts that limit you to be able to swap between all this stuff can hinder you, right? It's kind of a hamstring. So obviously we pride ourselves on doing that, but that's the big takeaway from this. The service delivery is kind of a coagulation of all these things and making sure they all feed into one another. So that's a lot of theory, but I want to show what that actually looks like, because I always think that in webinars and discussions like this, getting a feeling of what you're really looking for, looking to achieve, can really help to understand it. So I think I'm going to go to a little demonstration time and see what that looks like. So I actually have my CloudRadial tenant here. And again, this is not a demonstration of CloudRadial itself. I'm not here to talk about all the features and try to sell you on stuff. I'm talking about those three things. So let's focus on that first one, which is just standardization of the client. What does that mean and what does that look like? Well, it's going to get a bit technical, but I really do think this is important to understand conceptually. So what happens logistically, whether you use CloudRadial or not, is you want to start off with a base templated version of a client experience. And that client experience can't be too little, right? You can't just offer a KB article and a form on a page. I mean, you can, but really what use is it going to get? And it can't be too much, because if it's too much, then all of a sudden it's like overload. We see the too much example coming from, every vendor you use back in that operational layer at the bottom likely has some kind of client-facing report, maybe their own client-facing portal. That's fine, but offering, a portal per product you own to a client is insane, right? It's mind numbing. It's just too much stuff. So there's a fine line to walk of more than the basics. Not every single tool needs every single diagnostic all the way. Then you get into the idea that as we have clients, right? So in this demo tenant, I've got 16 individual clients that I manage as an MSP. How do I scale this up? Well, ideally, and we're going to work backwards from here, what I want to happen is when I add a new client to whatever experience I want, the client portal in this case, I should be able to say, webinar client comes in, and ignoring even all the customization options, ultimately what I want to happen is the moment I hit create this customer, I want that customer to come preloaded with standard forms, onboard, offboard ones, right? Standard kind of QBR report and stuff that sets me in a really good place to just customize if needed. That's the ideal situation for standardizing the service delivery, because then every single one of my customers launches off of a base. Again, I don't have my boss on this webinar for a reason, because I always say you don't really need CloudRadial to do this. It's just we're built to do it. So it's just kind of a preference thing. But as we get into webinar client, I refresh to give myself enough time. What should be happening is, oh, I didn't give myself enough time. Dang it. Basically, this is going to fill out with content all over the portal. So as I click around here in a second, and this is what I want to go back and explore, this is going to fill out pre-filled with applications and, again, support tickets and everything else that's over here. So this is blank for right now. We can go back to the main tenant, and we can see that like all the stuff that comes inside of CloudRadial, let's say some forms like onboarding, offboarding forms or whatever, super helpful if you have a pre-built like best of list of stuff, right? So cool, we have these forms. They should be able to be easily deployed. And then the theory is we'll use this one, Azure Technology, as the company up here. If this company deviates from our standardization, that's okay. It shouldn't be a whole new playbook, a whole new IT glue document to talk about how to manage client A. It should be as easy as, well, let's go throw another one-off form in there for them, right? This is the what rubber hits the road of what standardization and customization looks like. It's basically just, can you launch a template? Can you add on top of it? That's all there is to it. The specific details of all the features and blah, blah, blah don't really matter. As long as you can get that formula down, you're in a good shape, because then you at least have a start of a discussion saying we have something to build off of for a client experience. Clients can start to interact with us in a consistent way and unlock all those benefits. Let's see if my request service webinar client has come back. Oh my gosh, still nothing. How embarrassing for me. They'll come in a minute though. So that's pretty cool. Now, it's the same thing with the content that you preload with. This is something else that I always urge people, because sometimes we get on prospect calls, right? People say, I'm interested in learning about CloudRadial, and MSPs have very specific requirements. Traditionally, when you approach a client-facing discussion, especially in standardization of service delivery, like I said, it usually does come out to talk about ticketing, because the number one easiest win for an MSP is to standardize the literal ticketing service delivery. Because if you can do that, you obviously have benefits in triage time being reduced and faster resolution times, because information gets put up easier, and the client gets benefits too, because if they play ball and they actually answer the form, right? Look at our onboarding form, they just fill all this stuff out, then you can obviously set somebody up a lot faster than just piecemealed stuff back and forth. So as we get to this, you get into the question of how easy, what are the logistics of making these templates like load correctly, load in the way that you want to. So at CloudRadial, we come with a bunch of sample stuff. Like everything you're seeing in the portal now is like pretty much stock content that you can get access to anyways, right? Like it's just like, here's links to stuff, here's training courses, here's um, tickets, right? But the real secret sauce, and this is the technicality, is how much customization and how templated do you want it? When we look at deployments in CloudRadial, not every client, in fact, many of our clients say, I want to launch with some tickets, I want to launch with some courses, but maybe I don't want full-scale reporting, which we'll talk about in a second too. So maybe this whole infrastructure thing just gets pulled out for a second. Then what happens is, as you kind of refine the process further, you get into identifying who gets what. So I'm going to minimize these for a little bit of an easier viewing and explanation. But the idea is that, like, hey, maybe for the courses, right? We'll look at that first. I want to be able to publish some Bigger Brains courses. That's a third-party training provider to everyone, right? All. Maybe I want to push some HIPAA courses to medical clients only. So this system is something that you want to be thinking about as we talk about standardization of service delivery. The faster and the better you can do this, the better it is. Because what should be happening is when you define a new client and you say, I want them to have access to our stuff, I want them to have that transparency, that interaction, that visibility. Part of your requirements should be how fast can you actually take that to market. So what should be happening, webinar client, but let's see if it actually did it yet. Oh my goodness, we'll look at it in a second. Is basically, we have defined the core stuff. So what this area is telling me is that, like, hey, for Google Help articles, only show those to Google people. For the Spanish articles, only to Spanish people. And when I add a brand new client, what's really happening is that client is getting assigned this content based on what I tell it here. So in essence, this content area that I'm showing off is like a template distribution center. We don't need to look at all the mechanics and the theoreticals and the examples of it. The point is that when I look at any one of my clients, I do not want to start building anything one by one. The bane of your existence and ours is when you get handed something saying this could be a cool client portal. Like I've had people try to build their own SharePoint sites or whatever have you, and then they go in one by one. Rebuilding the forms or customizing a form is a pain in the butt because you have to rebuild it and then change out a field. So you have to copy it and paste it. That stuff is nightmarish, and it will stop you in your tracks from having that standardized delivery. So even though this content menu can be overwhelming because we obviously have a lot going on, I'm cognizant of that. Once you get your standards set, then really what ends up happening is every single time you click this thing and move on, you're able to set up a client pretty quickly. So when we look at all of the clients we have in here, the theory is that it doesn't matter if I added the webinar client or whatever else. When I go into, say, Brown Brothers Bottling, I'm expecting that constant. I know what they have access to. I know the content that fills out their portal. And all I have to do now is either work with that client or let that client add their own stuff. So that takes care of, at the very least, that literal service delivery gap, right? Saying I need them to have access to all these things. Again, customization is possible, but starting there. So when we get to the literal service delivery, like I'm talking about for SLAs and stuff, this is worth a mention. If you've never seen this, this is probably CloudRadial's biggest strength, I would say, is again in service itself. So a lot of people will buy the concept of the portal as long as it can provide those tangible benefits to the literal service delivery times. When we look at why CloudRadial is better than just going and finding a form or whatever, and again, this is applicable to any tool that does something similar, what you're looking for is not the ability for a tool to have cool buttons and whatever, and the drop downs and you name it. 99.9% of the power of the forms and to assist in service delivery is in what they can do on the back end. So let's look at this. If I add a new form, this is why I don't do demos of this stuff. I'm not in the business of showing you how you can drag and drop form stuff and show you multi-select stuff. You can do that all day long. Sure, whatever. The real power is in the options, right? So 99% of our partners don't have to customize any of this stuff and they just focus on this. So that glue that we talked about earlier, right? We have the client-facing layer, we have the operation layer. That integration layer is where you make the most gains from a standardization perspective. So ideally, what you're looking for when you look for something like this is if you take a ticket form, can it speak to your existing PSA or email address or whatever? Can it slot stuff in perfectly, right? So in this case, this is connected to ConnectWise. It works the same way whether you're connected to ConnectWise or Autotask or BMS or Halo, whatever. The point is, we're basically saying, where do you want this ticket to go? By priority, by status, by type, whatever. But the end user doesn't care or know about any of that, right? From a service delivery standpoint, they just know they fill out a form. If you go back and you say, I want to change PSAs, I want to do whatever, the form still works, right? Because the form knows that no matter which PSA, I'm looking for one of these pre-built options. I'm looking for the board or the queue or the team and the status and the priority, and you can change it. So again, we're not going to go overboard on this webinar because I already talked pretty technical, but you can even have variables in there, meaning that like you don't have to go modifying every single one of your forms that you're saying go to this thing. You change the variable for what is your default board, triage, professional services, tier one, whatever. By swapping that out, what we're building here, what we're looking to build is a system of efficiency, is a system where you can both create a portal easily and then customize that portal and have it working out of the box without you having to touch something and only needing to touch it if the client says we need changes or if you know they need changes. So a lot of the stuff in here is the secret sauce to specific SLA service delivery. Additionally, right, as another part of it is visibility is really big. So when we talk about the CSA, PSA comparison, remember I said CloudRadial is a CSA. A lot of the usage that comes from like a portal like this is the ability to even see like the support tickets back and forth, right? Seems like a pretty simple thing. Oops, let's go to one that actually has tickets. Seems like a pretty simple thing, but this actually gets a whole bunch of use. So if I have a whole bunch of tickets and I want to be able to see them individually for the organization, whatever, this cuts out any issue with visibility, with lack of communication, right? Email got lost, ticket got messed up, right? By having kind of a same platform that glues that operation and the client-facing layer, then you have something that they can interface with at any point, right? So when I go into any one of these tickets and I kind of read it back and forth, it's really, really easy for me to respond in here as a client to not lose visibility, to see my ticket versus David's ticket versus Jared's ticket or whatever. Again, this is one of the biggest things that people come to us for, but also one of the biggest things you should take away as part of that client delivery. So again, back to this slide, because I'm so big on it, it's really about balancing these three layers, right? And that's what I'm showing you. I'm showing you the tangibility that it's not enough to just say, I got a client portal. Does that client portal sync your data? And does that data sync properly with your operational bidirectionally? It's not a nice to have. If you don't have this, you're not properly doing the service delivery to and from, right? We're by no means the only tool that does this, but that is the core requirement if you're serious about getting into the standardization of service delivery. It's how does that look top to bottom, back and forth? And can you swap it out with something else really easily? So let's talk about that. What does that actually look like? Well, let's say I'm handing you guys this portal and I say, go ahead, click around. And you're brand new users, right? You're clicking around courses, you're clicking around forums or whatever. The day after I sell you this, we're swapping PSAs. We literally are going from this is ConnectWise, I want to switch to Autotask or something. I can't go back to you and go, hey, I just onboarded you, but everything I told you is wrong already. What do I do? The logistics and what that actually looks like in CloudRadial, again, other tools may be similar, is there's literally a settings area where you can come in and say integrations or PSA and hot swap, right? ConnectWise to Autotask. Let's plug in other stuff. Let's redefine these things. But that client doesn't know any different. They just know they got to go to your portal and they go to that form and that form will talk to whatever. It doesn't always relate to tickets, but that's one of the most common ones. Here's another example of that. Let's say you have a KB article, right? There's a knowledge base article on, I don't know, how to perform X process, and you have it linking from one area and then you want it updated, but you don't want to have to keep updating the client-facing bit. So same kind of operational issue. You've got a layer of truth, you've got the client-facing layer. How is that updated all the time? Well, one of the examples that we do this on purpose, is like you can use CloudRadial as like a simple KB writer, or you can pull it from like a web page. This option is not a cool thing we just thought would be cool, even though it is. It's on purpose so you can say set a source of something else. So you as an MSP are not bogged down spending your time managing the client-facing layer all the time, because realistically, right, if there's something that gets cut, it's probably the client-facing stuff first. Sadly, I don't agree with it, but I see it all the time. It's kind of like marketing. A lot of times companies will cut out marketing when they're focused on something else because they think it's kind of optional and the world doesn't die, but it will have ramifications. This is the same concept, right? The client facing things, when you give up on them, just tend to stagnate. So having that linkage, having that foresight to link every single one of those service delivery layers together is what ends up getting you a smoother client experience throughout the whole thing. So there are plenty of tangible benefits to hooking things up in different ways. Another example that's really popular in CloudRadial is like the courses, right? So for training courses, you get into the logic of what do I want to show and how do I want to show it? Well, again, you may work with a training provider. You may change that training provider. Can you offer a consistent experience where at the end of the day, clients know that if they work with you, they see your branding, they go to your portal and they get their courses, their tickets, their whatever, and tomorrow and the next day and the next day, it will work the same. Same thing, right? Do you want to build a course directly in here? Do you want to link it off to an external URL? Do you want to work with a third-party provider? It doesn't really matter, but this is what it ends up looking like when you have a tool that crosses those service delivery layers. Again, this is just a vendor tip. When you look at tools out in the industry of any type, you typically see the ones that are built kind of more immaturely focusing just on themselves. When a tool is just focused on itself, it'll just hover in here, still useful. But if a tool dares to have anything valuable client facing, it usually has some kind of thought in here. So again, how does that client facing tool, say a backup tool, how would it send data to something else? And how would that end up surfacing on the client layer? That's a matter of tools and how you integrate your experiences into the portal consistently. Again, this is something we built. It's a really simple feature, but it gets us a lot of mileage, which is how can a vendor, conversely, like ourselves, keep up with you guys? You guys might come up with a new tool that we quote unquote need to integrate with because that has that one report that your client really, really relies on. So something we do to circumvent this from like a point of contact reporting thing is like a report archive. So basically what that means is I can go into CloudRadial, and this is something more of, again, like a point of contact. This is not something that is visible to every end user. That little line here that you can see between university infrastructure just differentiates what a higher elevated user would see. But under our report archives, that was the problem we tried to solve, right? So if we're trying to say we want to be able to show your backup reports, right? Do they come from a vendor or are they just generic, right? Are they your QBR reports from a QBR tool, or are they specifically a named QBR tool like, I don't know, strategy overview, right? So when we look at something, when you look at this strategy, can you build a system that is reliable top to bottom, right? This is the stuff that I kind of consult on with MSPs strategically. So you're probably going to be able to forward reports from any one of these tools directly to the client, and that has some value. But isn't it better if you could say backup reports? And then basically from whatever tool you have, right now there's a folder that is generic, but you go, anytime I have a backup report, I send it into the portal. What that opens up is like what we talked about before, right? Now we can say, I have backup tool A, but I really like backup tool B better. Client doesn't care. Data's backed up. Checks the box. Who cares? And their perceived value from you, right? For the client facing thing is, can I see that I'm getting what I'm paying for, both for SLAs, for just in general client relationships and everything. All the client cares about and knows is that when they access your portal, your website, your whatever, and they go to backup reports, there had better be a backup report in there. I don't care where it's coming from. You're the expert. I don't care. Again, you could liken this a million ways. We do it ourselves. When you go to a restaurant, you don't really care where the client, I'm sorry, the chef got their ingredients. If it tastes good and it seems pretty nice, you're fine with it, right? It doesn't matter whether they switched providers. Obviously, you're trusting them to get the best experience and them to decide for you. MSPs, IT is the same way. The thing that's missing from a lot of MSPs is this concept. It's the agnosticism to all of it. So again, without going through every single feature, this is the main point of CloudRadial. And when we're talking about standardization of the service delivery, it's understanding how every single one of these things ties together and links back to, sorry, I know I'm flipping through a lot of stuff through those three things. So again, we saw the streamlined touch point just means adding stuff, templating, easy to access. Okay. Consistent onboarding means you add a thing, you're aware of how they're going to be entering your system, how they're going to be communicating with you. The SLA game, right? Routing stuff, making sure that they're tangible things that connect you properly to your tools, and then they can easily integrate. And like we just looked at with whether it's KB articles or reports or whatever, that agility, flexibility for you to change your tools, you to change your strategy without wrecking your client experience is a core constant. And that brings us back to how to standardize your service delivery. That was a speed run for me. I know there was a lot of stuff talked about. Thanks. Thanks for Katrina smirking at that. And I also have a demo slide, but
I want to take you back to about 10 minutes ago.
please.
Pete's got a question about how did you add the signature to the bottom of the form?
Great question. So when we look at our forms, and this is something that typically comes into play for your more like service request forms, like something that needs something a little bit more formal. You have, obviously, I can add it from here or from our content library, whether I want it to be stock. It's literally just a thing saying, should there be a signature with the request? And that actually comes through as I believe it's an image when they sign it, right? The actual experience of the end user, like you saw here, is they sign off on it kind of like a little DocuSign, boom, 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 and that goes through with the ticket. Really great question because this is one of the things that differentiates the usage of the portal. The question that comes into play a lot is, what do I have to do in these forms to get my clients to fill it out? Believe it or not, between me and you guys, it's little stuff like this, right? Having little things like additional breaks or conditional fields that only appear with stuff or a signature makes and breaks the difference whether a client sees value in it. So super relevant question and adds more value to why they would use your portal in the first place. What do you think, Katrina? Anything else? I can stay on here if there's any other stuff, but if not,
I didn't have any other questions come through. Um,
that's fine.
yeah.
Again,
And
I know,
certainly if something does come up later on, anyone can shoot us an email. But yeah,
please. Yeah, again, I'm super honest about this. Again, the VP of product, I do my fair share of sales because obviously I talk about this stuff, but I like collaborating with MSPs to talk about it in general. So if you're looking for an example of how this can work with CloudRadial, get a demo, talk about your specific stuff. Don't just get a generic demo. Come with your use cases in mind. Come with your trouble clients, your common clients, whatever, and just try to see if you have a good fit. Worst case scenario, you can definitely come up with something that is really easy for you to pilfer and use somewhere else. That's fine as well, right? We're in the business of not just making client portals and saying, please buy our stuff, but also giving MSPs the power to standardize that service delivery and really focus on that client layer. I know I have a demo slide, but again, this is my favorite slide because it really is something that gets neglected here two and fourth. With no other questions, I think we can wrap it up a little early. 45 minutes is, I think, an acceptable time.
absolutely. And if anyone does have any questions, I mean, I was about to give out Ricky's exact email address,
You
which is
can. It's
hardly
Ricky at
a secret.
CloudRadial.com.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's hardly a difficult one to find. So Yeah, absolutely. If there's no other questions, thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks, guys. Catch you for the next one.